I always believed that land remembers. Every rain that carved a rut, every step pressed into the soil, every root and stone it, all becomes part of its quiet story. My land remembered more than most because it carried a creek through its heart. That creek was more than water to me. It was a living witness, whispered with every current that it belonged here. The creek had been there long before the houses. Before the rows of uniform homes sprouted like weeds, it ran free across the valley. Birds nested in the brush at its edge, and deer came to drink when the world was quiet. As a child, I had followed it barefoot, feeling the cold water tug at my ankles. I promised I would always protect it. When the neighborhood grew, I stayed. My parcel of land was an anomaly, an untamed patch in a world smothered by concrete. The developers had wanted it, but I refused to sell. The HOA tolerated me like a stubborn thorn in their side. My creek ran as it always had, and I was content with that defiance. The HOA, of course, never liked it. To them, the creek was messy and unpredictable. They wanted straight lines, trimmed hedges, controlled lawns. They saw the water as a liability, an obstacle to their pristine vision. But to me, that winding creek was perfection. It was nature's design, not theirs. One evening, I came home to silence. No trickle, no rush, no music of the creek I knew so well. My gut twisted as I hurried to the back of the property. What I saw struck me like a blow. The creek was gone, replaced by a harsh gray band of concrete stretching like a scar. At first, I couldn't believe it. I knelt, running my hands over the still rough surface. The air smelled of dust, fresh and chemical. This was no natural change. This was destruction. Someone had filled the creek in, deliberately and with machinery, the HOA. Who else could it be? They had grumbled for years about maintenance issues and aesthetic concerns. They had threatened fines, even though I wasn't technically under their control. Without warning, they had taken matters into their own hands. They had killed my creek. Rage boiled in me. Stormed to the nearest board member's house that same night. Lights were on, laughter inside. When he opened the door, his smug smile told me everything. "We fixed your little drainage problem," he said, as if he'd done me a favor. My hands trembled. "That wasn't a problem," I snapped. "It was a natural waterway." He shrugged, sipping his drink, unconcerned. "It was messy. We cleaned it up. The neighborhood looks better now." His words dripped with arrogance. He had no idea what they had done, no idea what consequences were coming. I warned them, told him, and later the full board, that the creek was essential, that it wasn't just a ditch, but a lifeline for drainage. Without it, water had nowhere to go. They laughed, waving their bylaws like shields. "It's our jurisdiction," they said. "It's maintenance, jurisdiction." That word echoed in my head like a curse. The truth was, they had no jurisdiction over my land. But they believed power made them right. They believed concrete was stronger than water. I left those meetings seething, knowing that the storm would come. When it did, it would prove me right. I didn't have to wait long. Autumn rains rolled in, steady and relentless. I stood on my porch the first night, watching puddles form where the creek once carried water away. By morning, the ditches were overflowing. Water crept toward fences and patios. Still, the HOA ignored me. I began my own investigation. If they wanted to play games, I would learn the rules better than them. I dug through zoning maps, environmental codes, floodplain designations. What I discovered chilled me. Those 101 houses sat squarely in a restricted floodplain. They should never have been built. The creek had been their salvation. Steady channel carried runoff away, protecting those homes from disaster. The HOA and its arrogance had destroyed the only safeguard they had. It wasn't just negligence. It was illegal, reckless, and doomed. They had done it to themselves. I took photos. I documented everything. The concrete slab where water once ran. The pooling in backyards, the erosion beginning to eat at fence posts. I spoke with county officials quietly, asking the right questions without revealing too much. Piece by piece, I built my case. Knowledge was my weapon. Still, I waited. To rush into court would be premature. Nature would provide the proof. The rains grew heavier as the season turned. Each downpour pressed harder against the HOA's handiwork. The concrete cracked in places, water straining to reclaim its path. I could feel the land remembering. Then came the storm. A front rolled in, black clouds stacking over the valley like an army. Rain lashed the rooftops, sheets of water pounding relentlessly. By midnight it was clear this wasn't a passing shower. This was the kind of storm that tested everything, including concrete, including arrogance. I watched from my porch as the water rose. First it filled the streets, then backyards. I could hear the panicked shouts of neighbors, the splash of desperate sandbags dragged into place. But it was futile. The water had no channel, no creek to follow. It spread outward, merciless, into every home it could find. By dawn, 100. And one house has stood in ruin. Carpets soaked, furniture floating, drywall collapsing. Families huddled on couches, eyes wide with fear and anger. The HOA's president was nowhere to be seen. Through it all, I stood silently, knowing this. It was not my doing, it was theirs. News traveled fast. Local reporters filmed the flooded streets, interviewing devastated families. Words like illegal construction and negligence began to circulate. County inspectors arrived, notebooks in hand. The HOA board scrambled, their confident postures dissolving into frantic whispers. The walls were closing in. When they finally tried to blame me, I was ready. They filed claims insisting my land had caused the flooding. But I unveiled my evidence, the maps, the codes, the documentation. I showed them the photos of the creek before and after. The officials listened, and the HOA's lies crumbled. The truth was undeniable. They had filled the creek illegally. They had built homes where none should stand. Their greed and arrogance had created the disaster, and the law was on my side. I didn't need to fight them with fists or shouts. I fought them with facts, and I won. The court forced them to pay for restoration of the creek. Fines piled high for zoning violations, environmental damage, and homeowner lawsuits. The board fractured, members resigning in disgrace. The once powerful HOA was reduced to ashes, drowned by its own hubris. And the creek returned, flowing as it always had. I walked its banks again. Months later, feeling the water rush past my boots. The land was healing. The memory of what had been done lingered, but nature always finds a way. I had kept my promise. The creek still lived, and so did I. And as I listened to the water's song, I smiled, because I knew the truth that the HOA never understood. You cannot pour concrete over consequences, cannot bury nature and expect it to forget. And when arrogance meets the law, justice flows like a river. Always. The storm had ended, but its shadow lingered. Streets still shimmered with standing water, reflecting broken fences and sagging rooftops. Neighbors waded through knee-deep puddles, clutching ruined boxes of belongings. Air smelled of mold and despair, the kind of scent that clings for months. I knew this was only the beginning. The HOA, once so loud, had fallen strangely quiet. Their newsletters stopped, their threats ceased, their patrols vanished. Where once they had strutted like kings of the cul-de-sac, they now hid behind closed blinds. I could almost hear their panic in the silence. And I relished it. But silence didn't mean safety. I knew arrogance rarely admits defeat willingly. Like a cornered animal, it lashes out in desperation. The HOA would try to deflect blame, to twist the narrative. Their pride would never allow them to simply surrender. So I prepared for their counterattack. It didn't take long. Within weeks, letters arrived, formal complaints, accusations, demands. They claimed my property had redirected water onto theirs. They accused me of sabotage, even suggested I had dug secret channels to worsen the flood. Their lies dripped with desperation, but they underestimated my resolve. I responded with precision. Copies of zoning maps, floodplain overlays, and environmental studies. Photographs of the creek before the concrete and after. Testimonies from officials I had quietly consulted. Each piece of evidence was another nail in their coffin. They wanted a fight. I gave them a trial. Courtrooms are cold places, stripped of sympathy. Facts matter, not feelings. The HOA came armed with lawyers in sharp suits and sharper tongues, but their weapons were dull against truth. When my evidence hit the record, I watched their arguments collapse like sandcastles beneath the tide. Justice was on my side. The judge's words still echo in my memory. The HOA is hereby ordered to restore the natural waterway at their expense. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Homeowners turned on the board, eyes filled with betrayal. For once, the power dynamic had shifted. I stood tall, vindicated. The creek had spoken through the law, yet victory brought no peace. The homeowners were furious not at me, but at the board that had betrayed them. Lawsuits multiplied each, families seeking damages. Insurance companies balked, refusing coverage. The HOA treasury drained like a punctured bucket. The empire of fines and fees crumbled into dust. I could have stopped there, satisfied with the ruin of my enemies, but I had seen the danger of arrogance too clearly. If I didn't ensure accountability, someone else would rebuild the HOA in its image. I needed to make this lesson permanent, a scar the neighborhood would never forget, so I dug deeper, traced the permits, the signatures, the shortcuts taken when those 101 homes were built. What I found was rot, developers who bribed inspectors, zoning boards who looked away, and HOA founders who cashed in quietly. The corruption ran deeper than concrete. It ran to the roots. Exposing them became my mission. I handed files to journalists, their pens hungering for scandal. Headlines spread, floodplain fraud in suburban development. Officials scrambled to cover themselves, launching investigations of their own. What began as my personal battle had ignited a firestorm across the county. I stoked it gladly. Neighbors who once looked at me with suspicion now nodded in gratitude. They saw me not as the outsider, but the whistleblower who had saved them from worse. Families came to my porch, thanking me for standing firm. Their lives were wrecked, but they knew where the blame lay. The HOA's mask was off. Still, I remained cautious. Power never dies quietly. It clings and claws until its last breath. Some board members tried to rebuild their image, spreading rumors about me. They whispered that I was vindictive, obsessed, dangerous, but their words carried no weight against the flood's undeniable truth. Nature had spoken louder. Restoration began slowly. Crews arrived with backhoes, tearing apart the concrete slab that had strangled the creek. I stood watching as each chunk was lifted, revealing damp soil beneath. Water seeped eagerly into its old path, like blood returning to veins. The land was healing itself before my eyes, yet with healing came haunting. The ruined homes stood as reminders of what arrogance had cost. Mold crept up walls, grass grew uncut, windows shattered. Families who could not afford repairs abandoned them. Streets that once gleamed with order now sagged in decay. The HOA's dream neighborhood had become a ghost town. I should have felt triumphant, but walking those silent streets, I felt only a heavy melancholy. Innocent families had paid the price for others' greed. Children's toys floated in flooded basements, photographs warped by water damage. Justice had been served, but it was not clean. It was stained with loss. I turned to the creek for solace. Its current was stronger now, as though fueled by victory. Each ripple seemed to remind me why I had fought. "You kept your promise," it whispered. "You protected me." I sat on its bank, letting the water wash away my doubts. The battle had meaning. Still questions lingered. What would happen to the ruined houses? Would the families ever recover? Would another board rise from the ashes, learning nothing from the past? The law had crushed the HOA, but the hunger for control never truly disappears. I knew the fight might not be over. Rumors began to circulate of a new association, led by younger residents who believed they could restore order. They claimed they would be different, fairer, wiser. But power is a dangerous drug, and I doubted their promises. I watched from the shadows, wary, unwilling to be fooled again. Meanwhile, the county took interest in my land. Inspectors praised the creek's restoration, noting how it eased the floodplain's strain. Environmental groups reached out, asking to partner in preservation. For the first time, my stubborn refusal to sell became a beacon of hope. My land was proof that nature mattered. It felt strange becoming a symbol. I had been a quiet man, living. With his creek, now people saw me as a fighter, a guardian, a thorn in the side of arrogance. I carried that mantle carefully, knowing pride could consume me too. I vowed never to repeat the HOA's mistake. At night I dreamed of water. Sometimes it was gentle, flowing like silver under moonlight. Other times it roared, crashing through walls and streets. Always, it reminded me of power raw, undeniable, impartial. Water has no loyalty. It serves only itself. And yet I felt chosen by it. The lawsuits dragged on for years. Families sued the HOA, the developers, even county officials. Settlements drained bank accounts and reputations alike. One by one, the board members disappeared, moving away in shame. Their kingdom of fines and threats dissolved into legal dust. The mighty had fallen. Through it all, the creek flowed. It became my anchor, a reminder of permanence amid chaos. Odrin played at its edge again, skipping stones across ripples. Birds returned, filling the air with song. Nature forgave what arrogance had scarred. Watching it, I knew I had fulfilled my duty. But deep down, I also knew this was only one chapter. Arrogance is not confined to a single HOA or one floodplain. It festers wherever humans believe they can outsmart the laws of nature. The battle was won, but the war was eternal. I braced myself for what might come next, because water always remembers. It remembers every obstruction, every insult, every hand that tries to silence it. And when the time is right, it rises, just as it did. For me, just as it will again for someone else. The creek is eternal, and so is justice. Victory had come, but victory is never the end. It lingers, it mutters, it weighs on the heart long after the gavel falls. I walked the neighborhood streets where silence spoke louder than words. Houses stood empty, their windows staring like hollow eyes. The scars of water were everywhere. The HOA no longer existed in name, but its shadow clung to the ruins. Mailboxes still bore the stenciled warnings of fines long past. Faded posters advertised rules no one followed anymore. Order had dissolved into chaos, yet even chaos carried the memory of tyranny. People whispered about rebuilding. I listened carefully. My land remained untouched, my creek flowing with renewed vigor. Yet beyond its banks, the ground was poisoned with resentment and fear. Families that remained looked at me with gratitude, but also with unease. I had been the harbinger of change, the one who pulled back the curtain, and with that came distance. I did not blame them. To some, I was the man who saved them. To others, I was the man who reminded them of their ruin. The truth was, I had simply let nature speak. The storm had been the judge, the water the jury. Still, they attached my face to the verdict. That weight pressed heavy. The county stepped in, as I knew it would. Inspectors marked condemned homes with bright orange spray paint. Crews tore down structures too damaged to salvage. Debris piled on curbs like skeletons of a dream. With each demolition, I felt the past washing away, leaving an emptier, quieter place behind. But emptiness does not last. Into the void came new voices, developers with slick smiles, officials with practiced promises. They saw opportunity in the ruins. Cheap land, desperate owners, space for revitalization. They spoke of parks, schools, new housing, yet their eyes gleamed with greed. I recognized the hunger immediately. I attended their meetings, though they never invited me. In community halls, they spread glossy maps across tables, showing new subdivisions, wider roads, artificial lakes. They never mentioned the floodplain, or the creek, or the dangers. To them, water was a nuisance to be paved over. It's not a law to be obeyed. I stood at the back, arms folded, and asked the questions no one else dared. What protections will you install against flooding? How will you honor the natural waterways? Where are your permits? Their smiles faltered, their words stumbled. They had not expected resistance. They had not expected me. To them, I was a relican old man clinging to a ditch. But the creek was more than a ditch. It was a testament, a warning carved by time. I carried the memory of the flood like a sword, sharp and undeniable. They might dismiss me, but the land never would. Still, opposition painted a target on my back. Flyers appeared on doorsteps accusing me of blocking progress. Online forums brimmed with angry posts blaming me for stagnation. Developers whispered to homeowners that I was standing in the way of higher property values. Lies spread like weeds, watered by greed. For a moment, doubt seeped in. Was I truly protecting or merely clinging? Couldn't progress in preservation. Coexist? I wrestled with the questions late into the night, listening to the creek. Its voice was steady, its path true. I exist because I must, it whispered. So do you. My resolve hardened again. The storm's memory became my ally. Each time I spoke at hearings, I carried photographs of the flood. I projected images of submerged houses onto walls, forcing silence into the room. This is what happens when arrogance silences nature, I declared. My words cut deeper because they were truth wrapped in scars, reporters still called hungry. For updates, the scandal had not fully died, and they knew my story was their thread. I gave them my voice, but carefully, measured, never vindictive. I wanted the lesson to live beyond me, beyond headlines. Respect water, I told them. It does not forgive arrogance. Yet not all battles were fought in courts and councils. Some were waged in shadows, behind fences at night. My land was trespassed upon. Tire tracks pressed into soil near the creek. Tools went missing from my shed. Once, I found broken bottles glittering along the bank like threats. Fear tightened its grip. But fear does not rule me, I reported, documented. Stood firm. The county placed surveillance, and slowly the harassment ebbed. Still, it proved what I already knew. Power does not surrender easily. It mutates, it hides, it bides its time. The HOA had fallen, but its spirit lingered like rot. In the foundation, amid the turmoil, unexpected allies emerged. Environmental groups reached out, eager to use my land as a model for preservation. Scientists studied the creek, praising its role in flood mitigation. Students came on field trips, learning how arrogance had drowned homes and how restoration gave life back. The creek was becoming a teacher. Standing before those students, I felt a strange pride. Not in myself, but in the story carved into the water's path. This creek is older than us, I told them. It knows more than we ever will. We can choose to listen or we can drown in our own ignorance. Her young eyes widened. The neighborhood shifted slowly. Some families left forever, unable to bear the memories. Others stayed, building smaller lives from the wreckage. Gardens sprouted where fences once stood. Children laughed in yards that had been waterlogged ruins. Life, stubborn and resilient, seeped back into the cracks. The land remembered renewal. But the developers did not give up. They pushed again and again, waving promises of prosperity. They dangled tax revenue before the county, jobs before the public. Each time I was there with maps, with evidence, with history. I was relentless. Not for myself, but for the creek that could not speak. Some called me obsessive. Perhaps they were right. But obsession has its uses when fighting giants. I had seen what silence cost. I had watched arrogance flood homes, break families, shatter dreams. I could not let it happen again. My obsession was simply another word for duty. Years passed, and the ruins of the old HOA became overgrown. Weeds and wildflowers claimed the empty lots, nature weaving its quiet rebellion. The streets cracked, but the creek ran clear. Sometimes I walked there at dusk, listening to frogs sing where laughter once echoed. The land was reclaiming itself. I thought often of justice. Was it truly justice when so many suffered, even if the guilty were punished? Or was it enough that the HOA collapsed, that fines were paid, that headlines faded? The water did not answer such questions. It simply flowed, reminding me that justice is never perfect. One evening, I met a boy skipping stones at the creek. He couldn't have been more than 10, his shoes muddy, his smile bright. My dad says this creek saved us, he told me. Nodded, feeling something tighten in my chest. In that moment, I understood. The fight had been worth it, for the creek was not mine alone. It belonged to every child who would grow near it, every family who would learn from its lesson. My role was simply to guard it for as long as I could, to be its voice until another would take my place. That was enough. Yet even as peace settled, I remained vigilant, because arrogance always returns. It comes dressed in promises, in polished suits, in words like progress and development. But water has no patience for lies. And neither do I when it returns. I will be ready. The creek and I will remember. Peace is a fragile illusion. For a time, the neighborhood lay quiet, and the creek ran freely. Families rebuilt what they could, planting new gardens, repairing broken walls, starting over. Children played along the bank, their laughter rising like a promise of renewal. But peace is never permanent. It began with whispers, again just as it had years before. Flyers tucked into mailboxes, anonymous surveys about revitalization. At first, I ignored them, dismissing them as background noise. But then came the meetings, carefully worded invitations to discuss community growth. Language was familiar, too polished to be innocent. I attended, of course. I always attend. In the community hall, men in tailored suits spread there, maps across tables. This is opportunity, they said. This land can be reborn. They gestured at colorful charts, ignoring the lines marked floodplain. I felt the air thicken with déjà vu. History was circling back. The faces had changed, but the hunger had not. These were not the same HOA members who had poured concrete into my creek. These were developers from outside, drawn by cheap property and the promise of profit. They didn't wear arrogance openly. They disguised it with charm. But I knew better. When I spoke, silence fell. This land remembers, I told them. Remembers the flood, the lawsuits, the families who lost everything. You cannot erase that with maps and slogans. Some laughed politely, others shifted uneasily. They had not expected resistance so soon. But resistance is all I had ever known. After the meeting, one of them approached me. He was younger than the others, his tie loose, his eyes curious. Why fight this? He asked softly. We could build responsibly this time. We could learn from the past. His tone was sincere, but sincerity does not erase ambition. I walked away. Days turned to weeks, and the pressure grew. Editorials appeared. In local papers praising the developer's vision, officials spoke of tax revenue, infrastructure, renewal. Neighbors, weary of living among ruins, began to listen. I watched hope twist into temptation. People wanted to believe in progress, even if it risked the creek again. I could not blame them. Hope is a powerful drug, stronger than memory. Your home has been scarred. The promise of something new feels irresistible. But hope without wisdom is dangerous. And wisdom was my burden to carry. I had to remind them of the price already paid in water, so I organized my own gathering. No suits, no glossy maps, just truth. I projected images of the flood once more streets turned rivers, houses drowned in silence. I spoke not with anger, but with weight. The creek does not forgive, I told them. It only remembers. If you ignore it again, it will rise. Some listened, their faces pale with recollection. Others rolled their eyes, dismissing me as a relic. But truth does not require belief to remain true. The water would always prove me right. My only task was to delay arrogance long enough for nature to remind them again. That knowledge kept me steady. Developers, however, do not back down icily. They filed petitions, applied for variances, whispered into the ears of officials. They spoke of modern engineering and flood-proof designs. They believed technology could conquer nature, but concrete and calculations are brittle things. Water always finds a way, and I was there to remind them. One evening, I found another letter nailed to my fence. No signature, only words scrawled in haste. You can't stop progress forever. I stood reading it under the dim porch light, the paper fluttering in the breeze. They were wrong. Progress is not building over rivers. Progress is remembering not to. the harassment grew worse. Trash dumped near my property, spray paint on my mailbox, strangers watching from cars idling too long. It felt like the days of the HOA all over again, but I did not bend. Fear had no power over me anymore. I had faced the flood. It was a few shadows. Still, exhaustion weighed on me. I was older now, my hair silver, my body slower. The battles that once fueled me now drained me. I wondered who would take up the fight when I was gone. Would the next generation remember, or would arrogance win the long war through forgetfulness? Then I met Helena, a young journalist covering the revitalization project. She asked sharp questions, not the scripted ones. She sought me out afterward, notebook in hand. "I've read your case files," she said. "I want to tell the whole story, the flood, the HOA, all of it." Her eyes burned with conviction. I saw in her the fire I once carried. She reminded me of myself when I first realized the creek was under attack. We walked the banks together, and I told her everything, not just the facts, but the lessons. She listened with a seriousness rare in her generation. I knew the fight would not die with me. Her articles hit hard. Headlines screamed of corruption, negligence, and greed. Public opinion shifted again, this time against the developers. Officials backed away, unwilling to be tarnished. The project stalled. The suits grew restless, their patience fraying. They had underestimated not me, but the memory of the flood. For memory is contagious. Once stirred, it spreads through a community like fire. Families remembered ruined basements, sleepless nights, lost possessions. They remembered betrayal. And suddenly, the developers' promises tasted bitter. Hope turned back to caution. Arrogance was once again on the retreat, chased by ghosts of water, but even in retreat, danger lingered. One stormy night I dreamed of the creek again, only this time it wasn't peaceful. It roared, swollen and merciless, tearing through houses and fields. I woke in a sweat, the sound of rushing water echoing in my ears. Dreams are warnings, and I listened. I checked the creek the next morning. Its banks were strong, but erosion whispered at the edges. Nature, too, was restless. The land shifts, storms strengthen, and balance teeters. Even without arrogance pushing against it, water will always test the boundaries. My vigilance could not waver, not even in peace. Helena became my ally in every sense. She published, she challenged, she questioned. But more importantly, she learned. I saw her eyes sharpen with each meeting, her voice grow stronger. She was becoming the guardian I once was, carrying the torch I could no longer hold alone. Gave me hope. Together, we faced the developer's final push. A lawsuit bold, desperate, claiming my resistance was unlawful. They wanted me silenced, discredited. But the courthouse is no stranger to me. I walked those halls with calm steps. Evidence in hand, the creek's memory flowing through me. They would not win. The judge dismissed their claims with prejudice. Their case crumbled like concrete beneath a flood. I walked out into sunlight, Helena at my side, cameras flashing. But I wasn't smiling. This was not triumph, only survival. The war with arrogance never ends, simply pauses between battles. I knew that truth too well. As years continued, the neighborhood transformed into something unplanned. Wildflowers covered empty lots, trees sprouted through cracked sidewalks, the creek widened with each storm. It was no longer suburbiate, it was wilderness reclaiming space. Some called it decay. I called it redemption. Nature had taken back what was hers, and in that wild rebirth I found peace. Children explored trails instead of cul-de-sacs. Birds sang where lawnmowers once droned. The land had become a sanctuary, rough but alive. The HOA had wanted control, the developers wanted profit, but the creek wanted only freedom. And in the end, it won. Still, I remain watchful. Shadows will always return, dressed as visionaries, or leaders or saviors. But I am not alone anymore. Helena carries the story, and the community carries the memory. Together, we are the flood that arrogance cannot contain. The creek flows eternal, and so does justice. The years moved forward like a slow current. Seasons changed, storms came and went, and the creek flowed on with quiet persistence. My hair turned white, my steps grew slower, but the water never tired. It whispered to me as it always had, steady and unbroken. I had lived my life beside it. The neighborhood, or what remained of it, was no longer what the developers once envisioned. Streets cracked into pathways where grass grew wild. Houses half collapsed were pulled down, their frames scavenged by vines and trees. What was once suburbia had become something else entirely, an uneasy marriage between ruin and rebirth. It was strangely beautiful. The creek had widened over time, carving new edges for itself. Its banks bloomed with flowers, its pools filled with darting fish. Children who grew up nearby saw it not as a nuisance, but as a wonder. To them, it was a playground, a teacher, a friend. They didn't know the battles fought for it, but the parents remembered. They remembered flooded living rooms, lawsuits, shattered trust. They told stories of the HOA that thought it ruled everything, of the arrogance that silenced warnings. Around fire pits and dinner tables, they kept the memory alive, not to scare their children, but to teach them caution. Memory became their shield. Alina often visited me, her notebook always at hand. She had become more than a journalist. She was a steward of the story. Articles reached far beyond the county, spreading the lesson of the creek to places I would never see. Your fight matters, she told me once. It's not just local, it's universal. And she was right. For the battle had never really been mine alone. It was the battle of anyone who faced arrogance dressed as authority, who saw greed disguised as progress. The creek was simply a stage, a reminder that nature is not an enemy, but an ally if respected. That truth stretched beyond borders. Still, my own body betrayed me. Age pressed harder with each season. Nights grew colder, days shorter, and tasks once easy now demanded effort. I spent more time sitting by the creek than walking along it. But I did not feel sorrow. I felt gratitude. I'd kept my promise to the water. Sometimes children would join me, skipping stones or asking questions. Is it true the water flooded the whole neighborhood? They would ask, eyes wide with wonder. I would nod, telling them the tale in measured tones. It's not to frighten them, but to show them respect. They deserved the truth more than silence. Alina once recorded me telling the story, a camera resting gently on her shoulder. For history, she said, smiling. I chuckled, though I knew she was right. Memory fades, but records endure. If one day no one is left who remembers the flood, the story will still survive in her words. Developers still circled, though more cautiously now. They eyed the land with greedy hunger, but the county had grown wary. Laws were stricter, oversight sharper, and the ghost of the flood hovered like a warning. They tried smaller projects, but none dared touch the creek again. Fear is sometimes the only teacher arrogance respects. There were nights I dreamed of the flood again, but differently now. The water was not angry, not destructive. It was cleansing, sweeping away falsehood and pride. In those dreams I saw the creek shining silver under the moonlight, endless and eternal. When I awoke, I felt calm, as if reassured. The fight was complete. My neighbors began to call me something I never expected, the guardian of the creek. At first I laughed, dismissing it as flattery. But the name stuck, whispered in gratitude, painted even on a mural by the school. I did not seek such titles, but I accepted them humbly. Guardianship had defined my life. The land itself seemed to honor me. Wildlife flourished in ways I had not seen since childhood. Birds nested in branches overhead, frogs croaked from hidden shallows, deer returned at dusk to drink. The creek was alive in every sense, not just surviving but thriving. Nature had reclaimed its throne, and yet deep within, I knew I was only temporary. Guardians come and go, but the water remains. It does not belong to me, nor to anyone else. My role was to defend it during my time. After me, others would step forward, carrying the torch. That thought brought peace, not sorrow. When illness finally slowed me, I made my last request, to be buried near the creek. My family agreed, and neighbors supported the plan, not a grand grave, not a monument, just a simple stone by the water's edge. A place where the current could whisper to me even in silence. That was enough. In my final days, Alina visited often. "You know," she said softly once, "your fight will live long after you. I'll see to it." I nodded, smiling faintly. "It was never really my fight," I whispered. "It was always the creek's. I just listened when others ignored." She wiped away tears. And when the time came, I left quietly, like the fading of a ripple. No fanfare, no thunder, just a final breath beside the water. But I did not fear, for the creek flowed on, eternal, carrying with it the memory of my life, my fight, my promise. Nature always remembers. Years later, children still play along its banks. They skip stones, splash barefoot, and ask about the old man who loved the creek. Parents tell them the story, passing it down like a legend. The guardian of the creek, they call me. A man who stood against arrogance and let the water win. And the creek flows, as it always has, as it always will. Through storms and seasons, through arrogance and humility, it endures. Its memory is longer than ours, its patience deeper, its justice swifter. The water will rise when disrespected, and it will heal when honored. That is its eternal truth, so the lesson remains. Carved into the land and the hearts of those who remember. Never silence nature, never underestimate it, never. Believe power can conquer it. For arrogance may build walls, pour concrete, draw maps, but water laughs at such things. In the end, it always finds its way, and I, the guardian, rest content knowing this. I was part of its story, a single chapter in its endless book. The creek does not forget, and neither will those who listened. Justice, like water, flows eternal. And as long as the creek runs, so does my legacy. Always.